The motherfucking world is a ghetto, full of magazines, full clips, and heavy metal when the smoke settles. I'm just looking for a big yellow. In 6-inch stilettos, Dr. Dre. Hello. Percolating, keep 'em waiting while you sitting there hating. Your bitches hyperventilating, hoping that we penetrating. You get snating, cause I never been to Satan. For hardcore administrating, gangbang affiliating. MC Winner had you wildin' off a zone and a whole half a gallon. Get the dialing. 911 emergency, and you can tell him it's my son, he's hurting me, and he's a felon. On parole for robbery, ain't no copping a plea, ain't no stopping a G. I'm in the 6, you got to hop in the 3. Company monopoly, you handle shit sloppily. I drop a key properly. They call me the Don Dada, pop a collar, drop a dollar.
2017 is the year of the white guy yelling out World Star. Who would have fucking thought? Of course, the only difference from the status quo is we know how to use a goddamn camera phone. Proper, improper. Proper, improper. Bullshit, viewable. Bullshit, viewable. I don't know how that's so hard for black people, but apparently it's rocket science. You want to know what the worst possible video would be? A black guy having his buddy film him take a swimming test. Nothing but gurgles and 1/14th sliver of the screen visible. Love that website. High quality cinematography is found on World Star Hip Hop. Now, perhaps you're not very observant. Maybe you haven't really been paying attention. You're not tuned in to American politics. But it's not really in the best state that it's ever been in. And that's got people a little bit jumpy. Getting a little bit jumpy, a little bit violent. Tiny bit violent. Which is so weird because I could have sworn they actually really liked violence. You remember the whole Richard Spencer thing? Runs up and sucker punches him right in the goddamn face?
Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Yeah, that video clip right there. Followed by that amazing hashtag and all the press coverage asking the question, is it okay to hit people? Is it okay to punch people I disagree with? Is that okay? This one in particular is my favorite of the whole bunch. Is it okay to punch a Nazi in the face? Leading ethicist weighs in. Is it okay to put a cat in a bag and slam it against the wall? I don't know. Leading ethicists haven't written an article about it. Where do I get my morality from? Surely not common sense. I can't use that in the current year. That's insane. I need BuzzFeed to ask a Mexican intellectual to talk to his best friend who happens to be a leading ethicist if it's okay to do that or not. And then I've got to wait for the answer to get back to me. Boy, it's all well and good to advocate nonviolence. You know, nonviolence is the answer, said the guy that just threw a right hook at you. But when they start getting hit back, boy, they don't like that very much. It's not so much fun anymore, is it? When you start getting punched back. Now, I know some of you might say, wait a minute, why would you even bring up Richard Spencer? What does that have to do with all the protests going on? Well, they love to call people Nazis. And the people showing up at these protests all over the country, when it's anti-Trump something, or anti-alt-right, or anti-right-wing, or anti-conservative, are Antifa. What's Antifa, Jim? Well, the short answer is, it's the kid you didn't let up in the treehouse. You know, the one never invited over to a sleepover? That's who Antifa is. It's the kid that gets driven to a Starbucks in his mother's Prius, while he's loaded down with an iPhone and an iPad, trying desperately to keep them in the pockets of his skinny jeans. That would be Antifa. But maybe that's not good enough. Maybe you're at one of these demonstrations, you're at one of these protests, and you want to be able to identify who Antifa is. So I put together what I like to call Mr. Mediker's Pro Tips to help keep you safe. Pro tip number 1. If you ever see journalists or photographers gathered around a burning trash can, you are guaranteed that Antifa is somewhere nearby. They hate recycling. Pro tip number 2. If you see the world's stupidest ninja dressed in all black at noon, you're almost guaranteed that's Antifa. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure they're colorblind Naruto fans that don't know his outfit is orange. Pro tip number 3. If you smell something like tuna that's been left out in the sun for a week, probably means Antifa's nearby, or at least Antifa's girlfriend, who's a big girl. Now, those tips should be a good starting point to know who you're dealing with, and maybe you want to use them to actually go find Antifa and engage with them, in which case all I can say is,
be warned, difficulty is very intense. It may send some of you players to the Toad Asylum.
Because these are some violent people. They like to show up at events and get physical with other people. They hide their identities, and then they go instigate violence. They go by a few other names, but anti-fascist, Antifa is what they're known by. And protest after protest after protest, well before the election, up until now, they've always seemed to show up somewhere. They get in the middle of it, and then they get violent. And for quite some time, Trump supporters or conservatives or the alt-right would take it. And there seems to be a shift that's occurred, where that's not happening anymore. They've listened to the sage advice of BuzzFeed and others.
And if they say something, because talking is violence, and you have to answer speak violence with fist violence.
So where does that leave political discourse? What is the reaction we are going to see as people start to fight in the streets, as they actually clash, as we have good old-fashioned brawls taking place? For a long, long time, particular groups like Antifa and others would be able to get violent and be able to instigate situations, and they never faced direct blowback. It was always kind of accepted that that's what they did, and so people would look the other way. And now we find ourselves in a strange place where that's not happening anymore, where their violence is being met with violence. And so there are only a few possible outcomes from that. They will either be driven from the streets and stop doing what they're doing, which is probably highly unlikely, or they are going to begin to ratchet up the violence. We're going to see the good old-fashioned alt-left realized. I'm talking about commies with guns. They're going to come packed with airsoft. They're going to rain fire down on you with Nerf. It is going to be the world's biggest water fight, with these guys showing up with some high-end 90s super soakers. So you'd better be prepared. Call it a gut hunch. But I do believe we're going to see an escalation, a arms race in the streets. And perhaps it's pure speculation on my part, but I don't think that's going to work out very well for Antifa and groups like it, because they're going to run up against a wall in the streets. And it's not going to be the sort of thing they're used to dealing with. Complacent, scared individuals that run away from the trash can burning ninjas that roam the streets. We've clearly seen over this last year an increase in the rhetoric and an increase in the confrontations in the streets all over the country. I feel it is inevitable that these two groups are going to have at one another, and it seems to me that that can only lead to one specific outcome.